Welcome back to episode 3 of Physique Transformation Basics. In the previous episode, we talked around training, application, nutrition, and in today's episode, we're going to cover exercise selection and how you should set up your training as a beginner. Following on from the previous video, I mentioned my favorite split for a beginner would be upper, lower, rest, upper, lower, or if you're a little bit more advanced and your training's at a little bit of a higher level, you could opt for the push-pull leg variation. So, upper, lower. What does it look like on a training day and how should you program it? Now, the needs analysis of the individual is going to differ, but if you're a beginner, you've got a blank canvas. If you're following our first episode regarding nutrition and getting yourself into a position to start growing and adding muscle tissue. So, how you want to set this up is you break down the body. We have chest, we have arms, we have shoulders, we have back. That's your upper. And then obviously for the lower, we've got your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, and your calves. So they're the muscles that we're going to be talking around in today's video. So for an upper session, how I would start this off is before every compound movement you do per muscle, I would hit an isolation before. Exercise 1 would be some form of isolation for the chest. So this could be a cable fly, whether that's seated or standing. It could be a dumbbell fly, or it could be a pec deck variation. Here, what you're doing is biasing and putting a lot of volume and blood into the chest before you then go into a pressing movement. As I've said, some people will say you need to do your compound first. However, what I'm trying to do here is improve 1, mind to muscle connection, and 2, minimize injury. So this is great for beginners because it's giving them the opportunity to drive their targeted muscle with some blood flow so they connect better within their compound movements. For the compound, I would do some form of pressing variation. This could be a plate-loaded chest press, it could be a pin-loaded chest press, it could be a dumbbell flat press, it could be a cable flat press, Smith press, bench press. There are so many different variations. The key thing for you to remember is do the one that you connect with and ensure if it's a machine-based, it converges. What do I mean by that? It goes through the full active range of motion. A lot of machines and a lot of basic generalized gyms will just progress like this. You're not actually taking the chest through its natural plane of movement. So always remember that. Now, volume application for these two movements is very important for a beginner. Do not even look at a working set and a back-off set. Why? Because you're probably not at the level to understand the intensity, nor understand the difference between how you would approach both of these sets. So what you want to do is 3 straight sets over a volume of 8 to 12 reps. And the reason for this is because you're working through a great amount of hypertrophy, which starts at rep 6 and finishes at around rep 20. It can be argued it goes further, but we'll not complicate things in today's video. So you want to operate off 3 sets of 8 to 12 for the isolation, 3 sets of 8 to 12 for the compound. How you pick the load to work at is by understanding how you control it. So the reps need to be very controlled. They need to be concise under the correct tempo, form, and execution. What you should be looking for within every single exercise is failing at the bottom end of the rep range. So pick a weight where you fail at 8, and then what you'll do is in the following week, you'll aim to get stronger and hit rep 9, 10, 11, and 12. It doesn't need to work in unison, so you do that across 5 weeks. Second week, you may surprise yourself and you may get 11 reps, 12 reps, and so on. And it's important to understand that the goal here is to progressively overload the weight. If you reference previous videos, you will know what I mean by that term. If you're hitting more than 12 reps, this is a great sign that you need to increase the weight. For the first week, if you're aiming for 8 reps, you may find that in the second set and the third set, you fail below 8 reps. So what you should do is drop the weight ever so slightly to then fall in the desired rep range. We're going to move on to shoulders because you will have already pre-exhausted some form of front delt in some chest work, so they've already got a good amount of blood flow to them. Same principle applies. We're going to go isolation into compound. For me, there is no better isolation to hit the medial delt than a lateral raise. This can be done in a seated variation, which is a seated lateral raise, a standing lateral raise, a cable lateral raise, or a dumbbell lateral raise. Personally, I would go dumbbell as a beginner so you get the form and the execution right. And in recent studies, it's actually proven that the cable variation is no better than the dumbbell variation. The key thing is performing the movement correctly, concisely, with complete control and accuracy. Common thing with lateral raises is I see people pick their weight too heavy. They don't control it at all. You will see the best bodybuilders in the world doing lateral raises with 12 kilogram, 14 kilogram, 16 kilogram. You do not need to do this movement heavy. The key thing is generally applying as much tension through the delts as possible. And a key teaching point is drive your knuckles down against the floor and up against the wall. If you're trying to bias the medial delt, you're slightly in front, you're not coming directly to the side because this is gonna hit your rear delts, okay? So always remember that. This is the movement I see in the gym commonly completed incorrectly. Here again, I would very simply follow an 8 to 12 volume, aim for bottom range, work your way up to the top range. And then we're moving on to the compound movement. This is gonna be a shoulder press. So you've got the dumbbell variation. If you're doing this, ensure that the bench is on a 90-degree incline so that you're gonna bias a little bit of your upper clavicle as well as your shoulder. Same with a Smith press, same with a machine shoulder press, and same with a plate loaded or a pin loaded. So many variations. Again, ensure that it takes your shoulder through the natural plane of movement. You need to do the full range of motion, which is taking your shoulders all the way through here and into this position. You don't need to come here because you're making yourself vulnerable, okay? So you're pressing correctly, concisely, and following the active range of motion. Volume here, exact same, 8 to 12. Let's not complicate it, 3 straight sets. Back is a much bigger muscle group. And personally, this is the muscle group that I see underdeveloped in most athletes and most individuals. It's also the muscle group that I see people struggling to connect with, and primarily where I see that as a coach is when I ask them to tense back, do a back pose, and they can't get into it properly. This is a good sign as a coach that this individual does not actually connect with the back. Now, a key teaching point, whenever you're doing a lat pull down, whenever you're doing a unilateral cable row or a pull down, what you need to think about is taking your wrist and your forearm completely out of the movement. All you're trying to do is directly drive your elbow into your lat and down into the pocket. A lot of people will just yank the weight and they get significant pumps on the forearms, significant pumps on the biceps. Prevent that. And a great way to prevent that is using wrist straps to take the tension out and primarily focus on the muscle that you're actually using, which is either your erectors, your lats, your rhomboids, and so on. But we're gonna dive into detail of what movements you should actually complete when targeting your back. Remember, we're referencing for a beginner to simplify this, okay? Movement 1, which is gonna light your back up, which is gonna drive as much blood flow into the back as possible, is a regular lat pull down. So here, the focus point is driving the weight into your lats, tucking your elbows down into your pockets. So you need to ensure you've got a 90-degree tilt, and the focus point is keeping it controlled, not just on the concentric where you're contracting the muscle, but also on the eccentric. Far too often with a lot of back movements, what I will see in particular with a lat pull down is a lot of movement of the shoulders, people coming all the way down, which is perfect. But on the eccentric, they're coming all the way up and the tension's off. The minute those shoulder blades lift, the tension is completely off your lats. So this should look a little like in, open, 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 and then you're pausing there because the tension is still fixated on the lats. Less swinging when you're training the back, the better. This can be done in a variety of different machines. A unilateral plate loaded lat pull down, you can get a bilateral, you can get a regular cable lat pull down. Whatever you connect with the best, as I've said, but as long as you're pulling down horizontally, you're gonna hit what you need to hit here. Second exercise, we're gonna do more of a rowing movement. For me, this should be a staple in everybody's back day, some form of row variation. As a beginner, I want you to either consider a barbell row. Again, if you don't feel comfortable, break this down and do a Smith machine row, because this will be a little bit simpler for you and you haven't got the stabilization element of it. So any row variation here, you could dumb this down even further and do a cable row, but personally, I would be doing a barbell row or a Smith machine row. And remember here for the lat pull down and the row, you're doing straight sets, 3, volume 8 to 12. Exactly the same as shoulders and exactly the same as chest. Let's not do what I've done since transitioning to high rocks and neglect the arms. So this is very simple. A lot of people will spend all day in the gym and they'll try and do 2 movements biceps, 2 movement triceps. These are a lot smaller muscle groups now. So what we can do is we can extend the volume slightly. So I would do 4 sets on biceps, 4 sets on triceps, just to accumulate a little bit more volume here. And again, the sets would be 8 to 12, working within a straight set variation for these, just so the volume is the same across each of the muscle groups. Remember, we're only gonna do 1 exercise for these because we're doing 4 sets. But not only that, when you're training your chest and your shoulders, you're indirectly hitting your triceps, and when you're pulling, you're indirectly hitting your biceps. So there's no need to do 6 sets here. For me, for your biceps, I would very simply do a preacher curl, whether that's a pin loaded variation or a plate loaded variation. You're challenging your bicep across a full range here, and it's a great way to get comfortable with connecting with the movements. You're not complicating it with a dumbbell and swinging things around. It's very basic and it's hard to get the form incorrect. Key tip when training biceps and doing a preacher curl, I often see people rushing it in the lengthened. Enjoy it, spend a second there. And when you're coming into shortened, flick your wrists. Far too many people just come up like this. Flick your wrists and it will allow you to get the bicep shorter. Top tip. For triceps, just to get the most bang for your buck, I would either do a close grip bench press on a barbell or a Smith machine, or I would very simply do a dip machine variation. Whether that's weighted, whether that's pin loaded, or whether that is actually assisted through a dip machine. Here you're gonna get the most bang for your buck in terms of volume across each head of the tricep. And it's a great way to simplify training your triceps. There's a lot of complex movements when training your triceps, skull crushers, movements that you may never connect well with. So this is a good opportunity for you to get a lot of blood flow there and actually have a great mind to muscle connection. And again, volume, 4 sets, 8 to 12 across biceps and triceps. That's a typical upper day completed. Now, what we're gonna move on to is lower, or as people like to call it, leg day. The day everybody loves to hate. First things first, volume across this is gonna be the exact same. Now, 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. So how would I set this up? Now, undoubtedly, the best movement for overall leg development is a squat variation. But of course, we're talking to a beginner. Can a beginner step into a gym and complete a squat with the right execution, the right form, most important, the right confidence? No. So we're gonna bring this down now and we're gonna look at the hypertrophy focused to improve mind to muscle connection and get a good amount of isolation movements in before we then come to the strength work. We'd firstly begin with an isolation movement, which would be a hamstring curl variation. Personally, as a beginner, I would recommend a seated variation over a lay-in because the ability to move, wiggle more and be less stabilized in a lay-in variation is increased. However, both are fine, but just be aware if you are doing a lay-in hamstring curl to keep your hips fixed into the pad. That way the tension's gonna remain on your hamstrings. Same setup with these, and I won't repeat myself after this. 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. Secondly, I'd then move on to what would be a leg extension. The reason for this is to drive some blood flow into the quads before we then go into our main compound movement, which would be a squat pattern. Beginner, you may not have the confidence to do a barbell squat or a Smith machine squat. So if you have a hack squat, use it. Build up your confidence, record yourself, have a look at your tempo, your execution, your intensity, and use time that you have spare to get comfortable with doing a barbell squat and a Smith machine squat. And the reason for this is because, in my opinion, they're the best movement for overall leg development. If you don't have a hack squat and you only have a Smith squat or a barbell squat in your gym, do a box squat. Here you'll be able to get more confidence and you've got somewhere to fall if you're gonna fall. Very unlikely, but it limits your range of motion and it's a starting position to be broken down to then develop into a full squat and a full range of motion. The leg press is a great movement for getting a little bit more volume over another compound. Far too many people will overcomplicate this, saying put your feet high, put them low, it will bias your hamstrings and your quads. But your isolation movements are doing this. Primarily a leg press is going to be quad dominant. Again, foot position will depend on where it biases the most, but here, just keep your feet in a neutral position mid-pad. Following on from that, we're not going to neglect the glutes. So there's many variations that we can do. Personally, my favorite is a dumbbell Bulgarian split squat, but as a beginner, a very, very hard movement to get your balance and stability right. So basically, we would just dumb this down and do regular lunges or a machine glute bridge. Here you could build up the strength, the stability in the glutes, and you could progressively then move on to a Bulgarian split squat later down the line. Same volume, same application, but do not neglect your glutes, because if you're developing your quads, you're training your back, your glutes are part of your posterior chain. And if they become weak, what that can lead to is back injuries later down the line when you may be rowing, deadlifting, and it can lead to further injuries such as sciatica, which can cause significant pain and significant time away from the gym. And finally, we're gonna do what I don't do, which is calves. Do not neglect your calves. You'll often get to the end of a session and think, wow, that was intense. I don't wanna do my calves. As I've said on previous videos, maybe put them at the start of your session if you're not enjoying calves or if you're neglecting them. It's a running joke for many men, and I've definitely received this online, that you have a great set of legs but no calves. So we're gonna finally finish with some calves. If you want to also develop your adductors, this is a great place to put them as well, but let's not complicate things for a beginner. We're gonna finish with calves. Here, very much like your bicep and tricep work, they've indirectly been worked. So we're gonna do 4 sets of 8 to 12 here. There are so many different variations. You can do standing calf raise or seated calf raise. You can do them on a leg press. You can do them in a Smith machine with a box. Whatever works for you. Personally, I would begin with standing calf raises on a Smith machine, on a box, or a machine variation. Because the key thing with your calves is spending time in the lengthened position here and ensuring that you can go through the full active range of motion. The calves are all about range of motion and spending a second in the short and the lengthened, like every other muscle group. Now that's a complete rundown of an upper lower split. As a beginner, I wouldn't complicate things, and I'd run the same split twice. So I'd do the same upper and I'd do the same lower. And the reason for this is because how science works in terms of neurological pathways and breaking things down, getting good at certain movement patterns and becoming more familiar with them, what that will allow you to do is get better, and you'll repeat that cycle. What you also need to ensure is that you don't fall into the habit then of trying to change the movements every 4 to 5 weeks. It takes 6 weeks to build habits and get better at the exercises. So your primary focus here would be to rinse this training program for 12 weeks, potentially even longer, so you can perfect the movements, get better at them, and develop your skill set, your intensity, composure, and your accuracy. Top tip here, in order to get to the level that you want to and then progress to the next stage, record your sets, reflect on them, and ask yourself if you're taking things to true failure and are you following the correct tempo guides on the instructions. Tempo is a key driver of hypertrophy. So what you need to ensure is that you're controlling each part of the movement and you're training to feel the muscle. That is the full rundown for an upper lower split. That's how I've had so much success with so many clients, because we teach them to get good at something, repeat it and rinse it. Now, what we're gonna cover on another video is how to then set up a push-pull legs. I don't wanna complicate too much here and I don't wanna overwhelm you. So if you wanna get started on that, do it, let me know your feedback, or if you wanna wait for the push-pull legs, you'll have to tune into the next video. But always, thanks for watching. If there's any more educational content you wanna see, pop a comment and I'll see you in the next one.